I'm a Jew from Kentucky, that's what I am. The good Lord foresaw it with his infinite plan.
Welcome to the Bluegrass Schmooze. I'm Rabbi Ben Fried. Last time I introduced the show solo, it was due to jury duty. But this time, it's a much happier reason. My co-host Shani Abramowitz gave birth to a wonderful baby girl last month, Tzipora Liba, or as her big sister calls her, Tzippy. Love the name. Mom and baby are both happy and healthy, and we look forward to having Shani back in action next month. But before she left, Shani and I recorded a great conversation with Jewish comedian Ariel Elias. Ariel now lives in New York City. She's been on Jimmy Kimmel Live and featured in Rolling Stone, The Washington Post, and even Good Morning America. But she grew up right here in Kentucky. Before we talk to Ariel, we'll talk about the month of Adar Rishon, or Adar One, and attempt something very risky, explaining the Jewish leap year. No rabbis were injured in the recording of this episode, but it was a close one. It's all coming up on the Bluegrass Schmooze.
Forever a Jew with Kentucky, my home.
Welcome back to the Bluegrass Schmooze. My name is Rabbi Ben Fried.
And I'm Rabbi Shani Abramowitz.
And we are now entering the month of Adar, or technically the first month of Adar. But the rabbis say in Hebrew, Misha Nichnas Adar, Marbim Besimcha. The one who comes into the month of Adar, their joy shall increase. So we are super happy sitting together here in the studio. Our joy generally increases during the month of Adar because we have the holiday of Purim in the month of Adar, which is very exciting. It's a very fun holiday. But this year is a little unique. This year, we have 2 months of Adar. So we are entering Adar One, and Purim is not until the middle of the second month of Adar, not till Adar 2. So we figured that we would take the opportunity here during this first month of Adar to talk a little bit about how the Jewish calendar works. What does it mean that there's a leap month? Like, what the heck is going on here? And how does that all make sense? So the Jewish calendar, as many people might know, is not a solar calendar. It's not reliant on the sun the way that the Gregorian or the Julian calendar are that most people use. So you've all been listening to the podcast, hopefully for a few months by now, and you've heard that we have these different month names. We're not doing a January episode, a February episode. We started in Tishrei, and then we went to Cheshvan. And as you might have noticed, if you're subscribers, which you should be, the podcasts don't come out at the same time every Gregorian month, right? Like, we don't release on the 15th of the month or on the third Thursday. We release on the first day of the Jewish month, which moves around. And we know when the first day of the Jewish month is by the new moon. So when the moon is, when you look up in the night sky and there is no moon to be found, that is the beginning of a new Jewish month, which is its own kind of mini holiday that we call Rosh Chodesh. Shani, do you want to talk a little bit about Rosh Chodesh?
Yeah, absolutely. So just as you said, Ben, Rosh Chodesh is the beginning of the Hebrew month. And it's also a day, sometimes 2 days, where we have some special liturgy. We will always add Hallel to our services over the course of Rosh Chodesh. And Hallel is a collection of psalms and special sort of tefillot, special prayers and blessings that are, I would say, in their essence, joyous, and are meant to, we sing them. There are lots of beautiful melodies, both ancient and contemporary, that can be used to recite the Hallel liturgy. And we add that on Rosh Chodesh because we are so excited that a new month is starting. Again, it's an opportunity for renewal, to think about the month ahead. What are the goals that we have? What are the intentions that we want to set? And we express our gratitude for having reached this moment. Yeah. And there's also a special Torah reading that we read on Rosh Chodesh, slightly different from what you would read in a normal week over the course of a normal Torah reading cycle. So there are a few liturgical changes that we make to our services on Rosh Chodesh. But one of my favorite traditions that has evolved. I don't know exactly how far back it dates, but it's certainly become very popular in modern Jewish life, is that Rosh Chodesh has become a women's holiday. It's taken on a sort of feminist quality, and women in different Jewish communities around the world will gather together and again engage in perhaps prayer, meditation, a festive meal. We'll do some Jewish learning. Whatever.
Love a good festive meal. I'm just not invited.
Always a festive meal. And the reason that this came to be is that there, in traditional or classical Jewish law, Jewish tradition, there are so many things that historically women have been excluded from, ritually speaking. And so Rosh Chodesh became, or was seen as an opportunity for women to reclaim religious power, ritual power, and to embrace this frequent, right? It happens every single month, this Jewish holiday in a way where they and we feel like we can be sort of more included, more represented by traditional Judaism. And it's important to mention that these Rosh Chodesh women's circles have, I think, expanded and are now inclusive of queer people, people who are part of the LGBTQ community. And it's really, really beautiful. So if you are looking around for something to do on Rosh Chodesh, you might consider looking up a Rosh Chodesh women's group, and hopefully there's one in your area that you can participate in.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I think it's really a wonderful thing that, as you said, it's expanded to include, a number of people who felt marginalized by traditional Judaism, which, Judaism is a religion and, like many religions, has historically marginalized some folks. And it's amazing and really so empowering and so wonderful to see people finding the places that they feel not only included, but having ownership. And I think that's really, really amazing and fantastic.
So if you're looking for another way to mark Rosh Chodesh, when the temple stood in Jerusalem, Rosh Chodesh was the time when everyone would come to the temple and give half a shekel. They would make a monetary donation to the temple to ensure that the temple and the community could function the way it needed to. And one really sweet ritual custom that I've seen recently is that to sort of mark that tradition, that historical tradition that we have in Jewish community, particularly around the temple, that on Rosh Chodesh, people will choose now to make a financial donation or a donation of some kind to an organization of their choosing as a way to, celebrate Rosh Chodesh and ritualize the day a little bit more than you might otherwise.
It's really awesome. On Rosh Chodesh, they would also bring an offering of 2 bulls, 1 ram, and 7 male lambs. So if you also want to, go out and eat some really good barbecue on Rosh Chodesh, that can also be an additional ritual you might want to take on.
I will definitely do that.
So Rosh Chodesh comes every month. So usually we get a certain number of Rosh Chodeshes a year. But because we're Jews and we do things differently, 7 out of every 19 years, we have a leap year. Yes, you heard that correct. It's not like, American leap years, it's like, once every 4 years. If it's divisible by 4, it's a leap year. You get 1 extra day. Fine. No. We get a whole extra month, and it's 7 times out of every 19 years. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth do I know if it's one of those 7 years out of 19? And I will tell you, you Google it. In all seriousness, one of the interesting things about the Jewish calendar is it used to be set by people. That the way we knew it was Rosh Chodesh wasn't because we counted a certain number of days. It was because witnesses went out and looked up in the sky and said, we can't see the moon. And they came to the rabbis and they said, we have witnessed that there is a new moon. And that was how Rosh Chodesh was declared. And, when we're ending Shabbat, when we're ending, the weekly Sabbath, the technical time that you ended is when there's 3 stars in the sky. And so the way that you used to know when Shabbat ended was you would go outside and you would look up and you would see 3 stars. These days, very few people do that. Most people before Shabbat comes in, either they have a calendar in their house that tells them exactly what time Shabbat ends, or they've Googled beforehand or have a calendar on their Google Calendar that tells them exactly what time they're supposed to be doing Havdalah. I still love going out and looking for 3 stars. My wife hates it because what she points out, to be fair, correctly, is that I am no astronomer. I don't know if I'm looking at a star or a planet or perhaps even a satellite or, I can tell when things are a plane. But, they're...
Three planes in the sky and
three
Shabbat
planes
is
in
over.
the sky and Shabbat is over. But, I can't be totally sure. And I say, you know what? The rabbis weren't astronomers either. And they went out and they looked out. They probably were better astronomers than I am. Probably, maybe, I don't know. But they went out and they looked and they saw 3 heavenly bodies and they said, okay, that means Shabbat is over. And so there are times where Ariane, my wife, will have looked up when Shabbat is over and say that it's at a certain time. And I will go outside and find 3 stars in the sky before that time is over. And then we have a lovely argument during the intervening period about whether Shabbat is over or not.
And then 3 hours have gone by and Shabbat's long over.
Definitely over. Yeah. But so we have this tradition of a calendar that was very kind of attached to the human experience of nature, and now is more admittedly reliant on technology and on people making these decisions, because also the idea of calculating which of these 7 out of 19 years, again, like people had to calculate, was it a leap year? Was it not? Do I go back? But now you can just look it up. And on the one hand, that makes it much easier. And that's like such a blessing that I, as a rabbi, do not need to know how to calculate whether or not it's a leap year, because that is more math than most rabbis would want to do. And on the other hand, there is something that's a little sad about it, that we're now like a little bit removed from the more closely connected nature calendar that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when Joseph and I were living in New York when we were in rabbinical school, and once the pandemic started, we spent a good amount of time on our balcony, or our fire escape, I should say. It was not a balcony. It was a fire escape. And one of the things that I would try to do was to go out at the end of Shabbat and look for stars. But because we were in Manhattan, it was impossible. There was so much light pollution. And there was a sadness that, we couldn't do that. And then when we moved to Lexington, it's like, oh my gosh, there are stars everywhere and it's beautiful. And so that's been something that we've also enjoyed doing. And now we'll take our daughter outside with us. And I mean, she has no idea what's up there, but she'll help us look for the stars. And it's just a nice way to sort of reconnect again with the original intent of this tradition, but to also pay attention to how the earth has sort of helped keep us in cycle.
Right. And in connection to that, the reason that we have this leap month to begin with is that as a lunar calendar, if we didn't have any sort of leap month, our holidays would just like move through the year. And we can see this with a calendar like the calendar in Islam. The Muslim calendar is a purely lunar calendar. And so holidays like Ramadan, some years are in the winter and some years are in the summer. I have Muslim friends who much prefer Ramadan to be in the winter because the fast ends much earlier in the day. But their holidays move around. But as we've talked about with some of our holidays, they're very seasonal, right? Last month we talked about Tu B'Shvat, which is supposed to come at this time of the first, blossoming of the almonds in the land of Israel. We talked about Sukkot, which is all about the fall harvest. So the way that we keep the holidays about at the same time of year is through these leap months, that the rabbis, calculated that by adding this 1 month every 7 times out of every 19 years, they would be able to keep the holidays about right. So that's why when you have Jewish friends, they might be like, oh yeah, I don't know exactly when that holiday is this year. Like, because we're not sure, because they move around on the Gregorian calendar that we all mostly use. So, whether or not Passover falls in March or in April, whether or not Hanukkah starts in November or in late December, that's all because the holidays move around a bit, that when we have a leap year, that pushes everything back by a month. When we don't have a leap year, it starts creeping earlier and earlier. And so we have this movement that can make things hard for Jews because we are operating on a different calendar than everyone else. And it's not always easy to just tell non-Jewish folks if whether it's for work or for school or things like that, like, hey, just so you know, every year I'm going to miss like the 3rd Thursday of October. It's like, no, every year you have to come and be like, so remember that holiday that last year was in the middle of September? It's now in early October. And I don't totally understand why, but it's because some rabbis made some calculations a whole long time ago, and we follow the moon and not the sun. And it's really interesting, and it's interesting to be in a world where we are moving in different calendars. And we last month we talked about your Hebrew birthday in Shvat. The month before that was my Hebrew birthday in Tevet, and those birthdays, if we chose to celebrate them, would move around on the Gregorian calendar. But our Gregorian birthdays, like, my birthday that I celebrate usually every year is December 10th. That's a different day on the Jewish calendar every year. It's only every 19 years that you can be sure that it will that same day will fall back. That actually, Jews will say, like, when you turn 19 or when you turn, 38, that it's also my Hebrew birthday, because that it falls back on that same day in that cycle.
And if you are someone who was born during a leap year, during the first Adar, your birthday, in a strict sense, doesn't exist the next year. So you would observe your Hebrew birthday or your Hebrew birthday in the second month of Adar on the same day that you were born in the first Adar. Right.
Yeah. No matter which Adar you were born in,
you exist.
It's okay. It's not like a February 29th birthday where, like, your birthday really doesn't exist for 3 years. Like, you just celebrate it in whichever in the one Adar that happens in a non-leap year. So this is great that we have a leap year this year, because it means extra episode of the Bluegrass Schmooze. Woo! Makes us happy. It means we get to talk to more wonderful people. I'm pretty sure we never have two in a row. So next year, when we hopefully have season 2 of the Bluegrass Schmooze, we'll have one fewer episode, because there'll only be 1 month of Adar. We won't have Adar 1 and Adar 2. But whenever we do have these 2 months of Adar, Purim, the big Adar holiday, always in the second month. Mm-hmm. It never falls in the first month when we are in a leap year. So that is, if you want to learn more about Purim, which you should, because it involves the Book of Esther, it involves dressing up in wonderful costumes, you should tune in next month. That's your teaser for next month's Bluegrass Schmooze. Which will be coming at you on Rosh Chodesh, which you now know what that is, of the second month of Adar. Thanks for joining us here for This Month in Judaism. Stay tuned for a great kibitz with comic Ariel Elias right after the break. You're listening to the Bluegrass Schmooze.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members only pay a $25 copay or less. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Welcome back to the Bluegrass Schmooze. The saying has been attributed to Lenny Bruce, Steve Allen, and even Mark Twain. Comedy equals tragedy plus time. As we've explored on this podcast, Jews are no strangers to tragedy, and we've been around for a while. So naturally, we have a lot to laugh about. To explore how some comedians bring their Judaism into their work, and for a Jewish geography lesson, we sat down with Ariel Elias.
Ariel Elias is a comedian living in New York City. Growing up, this Kentucky Jew made everyone laugh at her bat mitzvah, and the rest is history. Today, her comedy is a fun mesh of unique personal stories mixed with witty and wry observations. Described as a sly young comic from Kentucky by the New York Times, Ariel has also been featured in Rolling Stone, The Washington Post, and on Good Morning America. She has performed on the set of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and was named a new face at the 2021 Just for Laughs Comedy Festival. After catching Jimmy Kimmel's attention with a viral stand-up clip that displayed her cool, calm, and hilarious composure, He invited Ariel to make her late-night television debut on Jimmy Kimmel Live. When not performing or writing, she's probably petting a dog or struggling through a puzzle. Welcome to the Bluegrass News.
Thanks. It's good to be here and a good reminder that I need to update my bio.
If there's one thing that you would update your bio with, what would it be?
A great question. Probably I would, at this point, it's the 2021 New Face was a very cool thing, but I'm like, oh, that was a full 3 years ago now. So
does that make you an old face at this point?
To be honest, I think I was an old faced when I did New Faces. I'm sorry. I was already using so much retinol when I got that.
So, Ariel, can you tell us a bit about, we heard a bit obviously about your comedy background. Can you tell us a bit about your Jewish background? What is your kind of like Jewish bio or your Jewish story?
Sure. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, and I think my parents both grew up Reform, but we went to the conservative synagogue. We went to OZS growing up. We were like pretty casual members. My mom every now and then would just sort of unilaterally decide we're going to services this weekend. And, we would groan and complain because it meant, okay, fine. Like, when you're a kid, sitting through services is boring. And then I think the big switch for me was the year before my bat mitzvah, because OZS, and I think the temple and probably a lot of synagogues in the South are this way, where we don't have a cantor. So when it's your bar or bat mitzvah, you really have to know and learn the service. So the year before my bat mitzvah, I remember my mom, and she did this for my brother too. We had to go to every Friday night service and every Saturday morning service for a year. And that there were a couple of other people in my group, in my age, who were doing that too. And we bonded a lot. There were three of us in particular. And we started, one of them was from a family that kept Shabbat. They were Shomer Shabbos. And we would always, after synagogue, especially when you're like 12, between the ages of like 12 and 16, any autonomy that you get is so cool. So we would walk together from the synagogue to his house, and we would keep Shabbat, and we would just play ping pong and nap and read books and like make out a little. So that obviously
naturally.
But that really instilled like, oh, I'm excited to go to services because I get to hang out with my friends and do this. And it sort of became this very comforting ritual that set in. So I think that was my relationship with Judaism. It's just like very comforting to have a little bit of time where, especially like not speaking Hebrew and not really knowing what I'm saying, it's kind of meditate. It's like saying a mantra every week, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I live in New York and don't go to services.
Well, I feel like it's so different in New York. It's so much easier, and because there are so many more options, like I lived in New York for a while too and really loved it, but it's not as precious as what you're describing.
I think precious.
Yeah, I love the formation of the Jew crew, right? It's like you had your crew that were like your people, and you were there, and it was silly and it was different. And did your Jew crew overlap with your friends at school or in other places? I think that's a really interesting thing, that for some folks, your like synagogue friends were also your like regular friends, and for some people it's like, oh no, these are very different worlds, and like this is, where I'm this person and this is where I'm another person. Were you like in two worlds, or was it all kind of together?
I was very much in two worlds, and part of that is probably my tendency to compartmentalize my life, but a big part of it was also that I went to school with one other Jewish person and she went to the other synagogue. So there was no real opportunity for it to overlap. But yeah, I do keep, I definitely keep my life separate. Even now with doing stand up at night, like I feel like I wear like a costume, like I feel like I wear a disguise during the day to keep things separate.
Yeah, thinking about what it's like to grow up in Lexington as a Jew. You obviously talk a lot about this in your comedy and your work. Thinking especially about how sweet things were at OZS, and you had this Jew crew, and I'm just imagining however many of you like walking down Alumni Drive being like tough, we're here, we're not going anywhere. And then I could imagine there being like a real disconnect or distance from like, right, what you were experiencing at school, culturally, how your Judaism showed up in other parts of your life in Lexington or not really at all. What was that like?
I think school was pretty unique for me versus other Jews from Lexington who are my age, because I went to Bryan Station, which is a predominantly, or at least was, I don't know what it is anymore, but it was a predominantly Black school. So I was around other students who, even though they were not Jewish, they were used to being othered as well. So it became less of, I think anybody approaching me with questions, it was always from a place of curiosity for the most part. And even when that leads to some ignorant, right? Like when people will say weird things to you, because it's not like they hate you or it's like anti-Semitic. It's just people who don't know. So I think because none of us were in the majority, it was probably a little bit more accepting than other schools, I think, just from hearing from what my other friends went through. And then, like in Lexington generally, I mean, it's weird. Like I do remember Lexington has changed so much too throughout the years. It's really grown a lot, but I remember as a kid, I have this one memory of, maybe it was the Westboro Baptist Church or somebody affiliated with them, like came and protested something in Lexington. And I remember passing the protesters on the way to Hebrew school, like on a Sunday morning. And it was just this reminder of like, oh, right. Like this is my normal. I didn't have anything to compare it with, right? Like that's where I grew up. But there were these moments of realizing, like, yeah, anytime you run into anybody else Jewish, it's very special. It's very exciting, especially if you don't know them somehow. Anytime a new Jew showed up, we were all so excited. And on top of that, like while I think most people are curious and well-meaning, there is always like an undercurrent of you are going to hell and you are wrong for what you believe.
Yeah, I know that's a common thing for folks who grew up as like Jews going to public schools in various places. I distinctly remember a conversation with one of my friends in high school where it was me and another Jewish kid in the car and then our non-Jewish friend. And my friend asked her, like, do you think we're going to hell? And she got really uncomfortable. And I think my friend had asked it almost as a joke. Like she didn't think that this friend actually would believe that. But it was really hard for her to say no. Like that was just what she was taught. And it was with no animus. And like it was just, that was the belief system. And it was like, oh, wow. Like, what does that mean about like what, like, do you think that's because I'm a bad person? Or is that like, and it changes the valence of relationships.
Yeah. I had a friend this is a very close friend who told me, I asked the same question of like, cause she was very religious. And I said, do you think I'm going to hell? And she looked so pained and said, yes, but I really don't want you to. And it was, I think for me, that was a big moment of realizing, and I have a joke about it of like them saying that they want that you're going to hell is not coming from a place of hatred. It's coming from a place of love, which is so much more confusing.
Right.
But I will also say that friend, I'm still friends with her, and she has since expressed the total opposite view. And, we all grow up and some of us change our opinions and some of us don't. But, we're kids and not exposed to very much.
Right. And we have more simple belief systems. And that's true both in the Jewish world and in the non-Jewish world.
Right. And I think if I I don't know if we were not friends, if she ever would have come around to feeling differently.
Yeah.
Right? If she had never had anybody challenging that belief, not that I was sitting there going like, I'm going to challenge you. It's just my sheer existence is challenging her belief, right?
Right. The power of relationships in those
Yeah.
sort of growths.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're seeing it now with our teens in the synagogue who are, right, maybe the only or one of just a couple Jews in their class or in their school even. And they're not even getting into like the politics or the analysis of what's going on in Israel and Gaza right now, but they feel in a way obligated to sort of represent not even a particular view, but just Jewish people and Jewish community. And it's putting them in a really, at times, difficult but interesting position to sort of articulate, who we are. And maybe you've never thought about me as your friend in this way, or you've never thought that this was a part of my life, regardless maybe of where I fall on the political spectrum. But it pushes kids. I mean, it has the potential to be very beautiful and, relationship building and formative. But it can also, I feel, push kids to a really scary place in terms of the responsibility that they maybe have to take on, or they feel like they have to take on.
Yeah, it's a real bummer when you're the only Jew in your school and you're like, ugh, this means I have to like learn foreign relations.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So
a lot of
I
pressure.
speak for the Jews. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. You're the Lorax of
The Lorax.
Yeah.
So you said in your bio that you made people laugh at your bat mitzvah, and I'm curious, like, did you do a set? Like, do you have like memories of like growing up in Jewish context, like at Seder or at your bat mitzvah, of like being the funny one? Like, was that actually like a formative part of like how you ended up in comedy?
So Seder, for sure. I don't think I was the funny one at Seder. I think everybody at our Seder was the funny one at Seder. And that is a thing that I've mentioned this because I perform at a lot of synagogues. And I've mentioned this at a couple of them, and it seems to be a fairly universal Jewish experience, which is that the Seder, it's the same story every year. So you start punching it up, right? You start making little comments and little asides, and you're trying to like make it, it's a story we all know. And that's like every Jewish holiday is
Right.
We have this, I think, unique in Judaism where we really tell the story. And so, yeah, we all get a little bored. And so we start making little comments. I think my dad was really the first one who would make comments under his breath when he was reading. So there was that at my bat mitzvah. I think it was just the nervous energy. But I started making little comments. And the one that I really remember that got a big laugh was, there's a part in the ceremony where the rabbi and like the women's association gifts you a few books that you'll never read. I think it's like Legends of the Bible. And I was like, cool. I can't wait to dig into this. And I remember maybe it was the rabbi handed me, her book, and she said, we have another present for you. And I said, does this mean I have to write another thank you note? And it killed. It destroyed. So that's the one that I remember, but I think I was making comments all day. It's like, I didn't know, but it's like, this is a day about you. And at that point, I didn't think I liked attention, but boy, do I. So that's really fun. And I was like, well, I'll chase that feeling for a while.
People still talk about it.
Really?
It's sort of like legend in the OZS lore, which is amazing.
That's why I don't really remember it, to be honest.
I think people just feel very proud and they remember it being hilarious.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Yeah.
I went back and found mine last year because it was for the parsha that was my bar mitzvah. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll talk about like, what did I talk about when I became bar mitzvah? And it was like such a 13-year-old trying to sound like an adult.
Aww.
Like it was so, there were bad jokes. There was everything. I was just like, wow, this is a lot.
Do you remember any of the jokes?
Did you read it?
I did no. I read parts of it as part of my sermon that week, and the jokes still were bad, but it was amusing.
I remember my dad had a joke because there's the part where your parents read their speech to you, and my dad I remember started his speech by going something along the lines of, you're 13. I know you usually tune me out whenever I try to give you advice, but I really want you to listen closely because I think this will really help you through life. Blah, 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 blah. Like he said, blah, 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 blah.
That's hysterical.
Yeah.
And such a classic dad role to play at the bar mitzvah.
And my dad doesn't
perfect.
My dad doesn't talk very much either. So I especially in public. So I think that shocked everybody because as much as everybody knows my mom at the synagogue, I think they don't know my dad as well because he doesn't come. And then when he comes, he kind of just finds a corner to stand in. So that really took everybody off guard, which was sweet.
So I want to ask about Jewish jokes and sort of content. You obviously talk a lot about Judaism in your comedy, but who's allowed to make Jewish jokes? Do you ever feel like there's a line that you maybe can't cross, or other comics can't sort of step into a circle if they're not Jewish or not, involved in Jewish community? How do you think about that?
The only things I can control are the things that I'm saying on stage. So whatever other people want to say or whatever jokes they want to make, I hope they're being thoughtful and intentional about it, especially now. Really always, but particularly now. And for me, I think over the years, I've tried to be much more thoughtful about it and the way in which I joke about it. Because when I was first starting out, especially, it was like, you don't really know what you're trying to say yet. You're just trying to figure out like how what's a joke? I don't know how to tell a joke. I don't know how to write a joke. I don't know what makes my joke special. So you're just trying to find any joke. And then as I developed as a comedian and as a human being, it's like I really want to show sort of like my perspective. There are parts of, I have one line now about, I say like some Jewish stereotypes are true. And that's like a thing that I would not have touched before, but it's like you get older and you realize like, yeah, some of them are true. We do have a lot of doctors. Like there's a lot of them. Let's talk about it. So I think like for me, the goal is never to punch down. I think that should be the goal for every comedian, regardless of what you're talking about. If you want to talk about the power structure of Judaism and that's go for it. But for me, I think it's just like, what are my personal experiences that are true? Mm-hmm. That's the goal.
I feel like comedy is such an important tool because it can help, sort of break down barriers and build trust, and you can communicate. Like while you're laughing with someone, it sort of brings you closer together in a deeper way. And I'm wondering if you've had an experience where a joke that you've told or a joke that you've heard has changed a relationship that you've had with someone who's maybe on the outside of that group.
I know for me, one of the most rewarding feelings is after a show, especially in a place where there aren't very many Jews or whatever, somebody coming up to me and being like, oh, I had the same experience. That's it. So I don't know if I'm changing their relationship with anything except that they feel seen and have had their experience echoed back, and hopefully in a way that at the time was painful. And now that they've heard a joke about it is a little less so. That's all I'm trying to do for me because my health insurance doesn't cover therapy. So this is the mechanism that I have for now. I think also like there are people, especially now because like crowd work clips are king on the internet. Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of people who are introverts who are very afraid of going to a comedy show because they do not want to be asked anything. And that's something I try to be very aware of. I want introverts to come see me and feel comfortable at a show. I will almost never call on somebody who has not first volunteered themselves. And I will also give them a million outs of going like, I'm going to ask you this question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. So I think like there are a lot of people who are afraid to go to comedy shows because they are different and they are afraid that that will have them, as a target. So for me, I never want to do that. I think I try to talk about anything that a lot of people are talking about generally, but with a unique take. I think that should be every comedian's goal. I have a trans joke, and it is not punching down on trans people. And a good feeling, I just did some shows in Vermont this past weekend, and a trans woman came up to me and was like, I loved that joke. Like, that's one of the first trans jokes I've heard where I actually liked it. And of course, that's not speaking for all trans people. I'm sure there are trans people who hate that joke and non-trans people who hate that joke, but it's fair to hate my jokes. But yeah, you should always be punching up, and I hope people feel seen.
He asked me if I would stay with him if he realized he was trans, and my honest answer was yes, absolutely, which he was surprised by. So I explained to him, well, for one, he's more than just a body to me. Right? He's a human being. I love him for who he is. Divorce is expensive. But two, and more importantly, my least favorite thing about him you guys are smart, is that he's a man. Right? He has a lot of wonderful qualities. That's not one of them.
So I guess on the flip side of that, have you ever been at a show where someone told a specific, like a Jewish joke that you were like, oh, that wasn't so good. That felt like punching down. That like, and what do you do about that? Like as a comic yourself, do you approach that comic? Do you let them know that like, hey, I don't know if like this is what you were trying to do, but this is how it felt to me as a Jewish person. Like, is that something you're able to do?
You know what's nice about comedy is like the feedback is immediate. So usually when that happens, and I can only think of a handful of times where it's actually happened at a show and not at some open mic, which is like the depths of despair and like echo chamber. I do remember this summer doing a show, and there was a woman who was clearly newer at comedy, at stand-up, and I think she was trying to do sort of like edgelord, like I'll say the thing. And I think like there was a time when you could say those things and it was clearly ironic. But now that anti-Semitism is like, it's like bell bottoms, like it's back, baby. I think now that like you have to be so much more thoughtful about that stuff. So she was doing these jokes, and I don't remember what they were, but it was very uncomfortable. But I think she knew it on stage. She was uncomfortable because of the feedback that she was getting from the crowd. Crowds most of the time are pretty smart and are not shy about letting you know that they don't like what you're saying. But after the show, I went up after her, and of course I did like a bunch of Jewish jokes and whatever in the way that I do them. And I remember after the show, she and I were walking out together, and she was so apologetic and was like, I didn't mean those things. Like I didn't say anything to her. But she felt it. And I did say to her, like, I think you really just need to think about like, what are you trying to do up there? Like, what is your goal here? Which I think is something so many people need to think about more, is what is your goal here? Not just in stand-up, in life.
Yeah,
what is your
right.
goal here?
Yeah, right.
So that's the only thing that I can really remember. But people will like, audiences they'll let you know, and either you're a comedian who likes that reaction, who likes people, like cringing, and some people like that. Most people don't. Most comedians don't actually like that reaction.
So is there, and speaking of Jewish stereotypes, is there like a secret society of Jewish comedians? And if so, have you been inducted into it yet?
If there is, I don't know about it. It's really secret if there is. There is definitely like a bond.
Right. That was what I was going to say. Is like, you know, jokes aside, like, is there a bond when you come across other Jews? And like, who are like, are there like famous Jewish comics who you've come across who it's been like cool to specifically have that connection?
I met Judy Gold this summer at JFL at a festival. Cool. And I remember she and I had like a fairly instant bond over very Jewish stuff. And I remember she asked me, like, do you work on the high holidays? And I was like, I really try not to. And then from there, we were like off to the races. It's a little odd, though, because I think for a lot of Jewish comedians, most of them tended to have grown up in New York or New Jersey or whatever. And I do think there is this sort of unspoken culture that they have that I do not share. From growing up in Kentucky, there's like, it's like even my husband is, he's from New York and he has a very different Jewish experience because both of his parents are immigrants. His dad was born in a refugee camp. There's like, it's very different. And he has a knowledge of Jewish food and culture that I do not have because his mom speaks Yiddish. And there's so much stuff that for me is missing, where he'll say something or his mom will say something and I feel so lost and have no idea what that means. And they're like, you didn't grow up around blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I did not. For me, it was whatever my parents knew, like that's what I knew. And my parents are from New Jersey, but still things get lost in translation.
The land of our people.
Yeah. But I think there's a particular neurosis that comes from being in New York that a lot of Jews have, because a lot of Jews have come from New York, that I don't think I share. And there's a part of me that feels like I'm missing out by not constantly spiraling.
So on that note, to the extent that you're comfortable sharing, like, what does your Jewish life look like now, aside for being a major theme in a lot of your work? What's your Jewish life like in New York?
As far as like a traditional basis goes, my husband and I, like, we remembered to light candles for Hanukkah and say the prayer, I would say 6 out of the 8 nights. Pretty good.
Yeah.
For a couple. Solid. For a couple with no children and for somebody who works at night, that's pretty good. Because we would either have to remember to do it early before I left or when I came home at like midnight. And then one of us would have to stay up to make sure the apartment didn't catch on fire. So pretty impressive. I think I still do like the big holidays. We still have like friends who are a bit more observant than we are, who we'll get together with them. I made a challah for Rosh Hashanah. I feel like I'm trying to prove that I'm like still doing things to these 2 rabbis where I'm like, I swear still.
Have you called your mother?
We talked on Monday. For me, I don't have a synagogue here. I feel very lucky though, in that I perform at a lot of synagogues. So and it's so comforting to see like what is the same in all of them.
Yeah. Sure.
And so for me, that always feels like, I get to be a temporary, I kind of like lie to myself. Maybe it's not a lie. I tell myself I'm like touring different synagogues to figure out like when we leave New York City, like where we'll settle and what synagogue we'll join.
You don't want to come back to Lexington? Come back to OZS.
It's a little too close to everybody I grew up with.
Totally.
But we'll see. Who knows? Who knows what the future has in store? But I think, like culturally, I feel very Jewish. My husband and I, one time we took a trip with 2 other couples, and I remember he and I were just like bickering constantly. And one of the other couples was like, hey guys, like, can you not fight? And we were like, this is our foreplay. This is not, what are you talking about? This is not, This is not fighting. This is like how we get to know each other better. And that to me feels very Jewish.
Yeah, very Jewish.
So in the sense that I bicker with my husband constantly, I am keeping a lot of Jewish traditions alive in my home.
So one question that I've had a chance to see your show. It's very fun. Highly recommend if anyone's listening. If Ariel comes to your area, you should go. But a lot of your jokes are rather personal. And I'm curious, I joked about have you called your mother recently, but do your parents come to or watch your shows? And what is that like? Because I mean, like when we talk about like Jewish stereotypes, the Jewish parent is also kind of a stereotype. And I'm curious, are they proud? Are they cringing? Are they somewhere in between or both? What is that experience like?
These days, my parents are only proud. They love coming to shows. I think they would come to more shows if I let them. I think they would fly to come to a show if I let them. They love it. I don't know what it's like for them. I don't know if they have to do some sort of, mental distancing and pretend like I'm not their daughter on stage. I really don't know, but I know like they have seen me throughout the years. They started coming to shows way before I would have wanted them to. So they have also seen the progression of, from backs of bars, or especially when I was like really bad at it. I think they came and saw me maybe like my second or third month doing stand-up, and that was awful.
Oh, wow.
So bad. And then, my mom one time came to a show at this club that doesn't exist anymore, but this club was notorious for both like being a home for comedians in a really beautiful way, and also being so gross and, just seedy, I think is like a good word for it. And I remember my mom coming to a show, and on stage there was a guy who, as part of the show, shotgunned a beer. And basically he shotgunned this beer and I guess forgot to breathe and passed out into my mom and like spilled
Oh my God.
spilled her drink all over her. And my mom was like, she was such a mom. She was just like, is he okay? Like that was she was just like, does he need a doctor? Do we need to get him somewhere?
Oh my God.
So
amazing.
I think anything, because they have seen the long journey that it's been for me up close. Now when there are actually people coming to see me who are buying tickets to see me, and we are in a real traditional comedy club that seems to have some adult supervision, they are so thrilled and proud and can just enjoy it. Yeah, I think, and I'm sure some things like
Amazing.
mortify them. I know when I did I think it's harder for them when I'm doing shows like in Lexington when everybody they know is there, because then those people are looking at my parents to see what their reaction is. And my parents are always just like, yeah, it's fine. We've heard she's a grown up.
That's great.
Tell us about the Mrs. Maisel gig. What was that like?
That was cool. That was the most I had ever been paid in one day at the time, which was awesome. But it was for Maisel, I know they didn't usually do this, but they had a few scenes that required like 400 extras on set, and they were not used to having that many people on set, and they knew that they were going to have to reset however things were being shot. It was going to take a while to reset the cameras between takes. So what they wanted to do is, because the scene was Mrs. Maisel performing for the troops, they wanted to keep all of the extras in the vibe of we're at a comedy show. So, and at the time I had a few different friends who were writing for that show. And so they were looking for 2 comedians to come and perform in between takes. So it was me and another guy. And it was cool. It was like on Long Island at some, small airport that had a bunch of, it was also a plane museum. And it was very intimidating at the time because also like normally when you do stand up, they go, hey, here's how much time you're doing and here's when you're going on. This was, we have no idea how much time it's going to take us to reset. And, and we have no idea, you're just going to need to be there and we're just going to hand you a microphone and you go up. So that was, it was, and also it doesn't matter if you're in the middle of a joke or a punchline. When they're ready, you have to get off stage.
They're ready.
So they're ready.
Wow.
Right. This is not about you. This is about them. But it was cool. It was very cool to be on set and to see the inner workings of this and how much goes into it. I met the guys who write all of the music for Maisel, and that was really neat because I was like, "Oh, these all sound like real songs," and they're like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh,
we worked pretty hard on that."
Did you get like a special thanks like credit in that episode? Like, are you in the credits?
I don't think so. I've never gone and looked. I didn't watch the show. But
we won't tell anyone.
Thanks. You can tell whoever you want now, but the show's not on the air anymore. But it was hard when I was there. They were like, what do you love the show? And I was like, yeah, it's so good. But it was cool. It was very cool to see how much goes into it. And it was very cool to perform on that. It's a huge stage. And I'm just looking out at like 400 mostly young men in uniforms where I was like, oh, okay, everybody here is very hot. This is great. If I was single, I would let all of you know that right now. It was a cool experience.
So we are going to move into our lightning round. We're going to ask you a series of questions that we ask all of our guests. Before we do that, I have a quick Jewish geography question. For folks who aren't aware, Jewish geography is where it's not the geography of where Jews live. It is Jews connecting to each other through mutual acquaintances and friends. If you've heard of the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, very similar, just Jewish. Was the Shomer Shabbat person in your Jew crew Asher Finkel?
Yeah.
Of course. I knew it.
Bingo. He was my best friend he's one of my best friends at summer camp growing up at Camp Young Judea. So small world.
The ping pong table is still there in their basement.
I'm glad.
And now we've started to gather around on Shabbat afternoon and play ping pong there. It has a nice long lineage.
All right. So now that we've gotten through that Jewish geography, into the lightning round. What is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Passover. I love Passover.
Honey cake or apples and honey?
Apples and honey.
Excellent choice. What is the best Purim costume that you can ever remember wearing?
I don't know that I ever went all out for Purim in a way that I probably should have. I think I used to have a Snoopy mask and I would just wear that sometimes, but I never really did it up.
Snoopy is solid.
Best Yom Kippur breakfast food?
Probably like a hand-pulled noodle soup.
Ooh.
Sounds so good.
Yeah.
Favorite biblical character?
Miriam.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, Hamantaschen or latkes?
Latkes.
Yes.
Who chooses Hamantaschen?
Nobody yet.
Okay.
But it is the subject of much debate generally.
I guess Hamantaschen are more versatile, right? You can put different fillings.
Yeah.
But
do more with them.
Come on.
Yeah. We're not anti-Hamantaschen here. It just, when you put them up against the latke.
Or anything. It's not one of our best.
Before we leave, we have to do our l'chaim of the month. At the end of every episode, we each offer up a l'chaim to, it could be a person, it could be an organization that's doing really good work that you want to highlight. Just a l'chaim of the month that is celebratory of something or someone in your life. So, Shani, do you wanna start us off with your l'chaim of the month?
Sure. I feel like it's similar to my l'chaim of the month from last episode, but it still feels very true. God willing, in a couple weeks, and this is going to be played later, but I'm going to go on maternity leave, and a lot of people from OZS and from the community are stepping up in lots of ways, big and small, to make sure that things can continue in my absence. And I'm really grateful for all the help and support that they give in lots of different ways. So l'chaim to all of the folks at OZS.
L'chaim.
L'chaim.
Ariel, do you have a l'chaim of the month?
Yeah, my l'chaim is my two friends, Molly and Julie, who I have known for like 10 years now, who we were all friends in New Orleans, and now we're all friends in New York. Molly and Julie are both respectively, individually going through like very weird, tough life things. But they have gotten me through like every tough life thing that I've had in the last 10 years, including just like every day, like feeling low kind of things in the last, like, I don't know, however many months I've existed in New York. So l'chaim to Molly and Julie, because they're just the best.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. And this is going to be played in Adar in a couple of months, but when we're taping this, we just finished up Hanukkah, and I want to give my l'chaim to the people who most often hate being recognized, who are the people who do the most work behind the scenes to make everything happen. So specifically to some of our staff at Knesset Israel, to Yonatan Yasmin and Lauren Schipper, who do so much, and then also to some of our most core volunteers, especially Beth Haynes, who again will hate having a shout out on this podcast, but so deserves it. For all of the work that they did in putting together and making sure we had latkes, and that the bounce houses made it into the building, and all of the other things that had to happen for all of our successful Hanukkah programming. So l'chaim to y'all.
L'chaim.
L'chaim, Beth Haynes.
There you go. Shout out. So thank you, Ariel, for being with us. Just such a pleasure. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you soon in Lexington.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Also, Shani, my mom loves you so much and talks about you probably every week, and just raves about you. So thanks for
it's mutual. I adore your mom.
Me too.
Oh, my pleasure.
So thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Bluegrass Schmooze. If you liked listening to and laughing with Ariel Elias, she'll be performing at KI's Gala coming up in June. There will be more information soon on our website, KnessetIsrael.com. And coming up next month, Shani will be back, and so will Adar. It's Adar 2, the sequel. Adar Strikes Back, and we've got a lot to talk about. I'm Rabbi Ben Fried. See you then. The Bluegrass Schmooze is created and produced by Rabbi Shani Abramowitz and me, Rabbi Ben Fried. Our executive producer is Laura Ellis.
Production assistance from Alex Biscardi. Our opening and closing song is Jew from Kentucky, written by Dan Byrne and performed by Dan Byrne and Bridget Kalin.
Thanks to Knesset Israel Congregation in Louisville and Ohave Zion Synagogue in Lexington for believing in two young rabbis and helping us make this podcast a reality. Our show is made possible by support from the Jewish Heritage Fund. The Bluegrass Schmooze is a part of the Louisville Public Media Podcast Incubator, with support from the Eye Care Institute's Butchertown Clinical Trials.
Find us on Instagram for lots of extra content. We're at Bluegrass Schmooze, or send us an email at schmooze@lpm.org.
To keep in touch and to learn how you can help us continue this work, visit bluegrassschmooze.org.
We're Jews from Kentucky, that's what we are. We drink our mint juleps from a kosher dill jar. Wherever we wander, wherever we roam, Jews from Kentucky is always at home. Everybody.
Support for LPM podcasts comes from the Eye Care Institute and Butchertown Clinical Trials, where they strive for diversity, equity, and inclusion within their staff, patients, and clinical trial participants. To learn more, visit butchertown.clinic.